You know that feeling, right? That internal friction, that invisible wall you smack into when you know you've got something to do. Well, this isn't about being lazy. Not at all. We're going to explore what's really happening in that quiet, and let's be honest, often frustrating battle we all have just managing our own minds.
I mean, have you ever been there? The to-do list is staring you in the face, the next step couldn't be more obvious, but your mind and your body, they just refuse to cooperate. You feel totally frozen, even though you know exactly what you should be doing. Yeah, if that rings a bell, then you are in exactly the right place. Okay, let's get into this. So let's start with a behavior we all know and maybe love to hate, procrastination. But we're going to look at it through a whole new lens, because that simple act of putting things off, it's way more complex and frankly, a lot more interesting than it seems on the surface.
The go-to label for this feeling is almost always a harsh one, isn't it? Laziness. It's a word we beat ourselves up with, and maybe a word other people have used against us. But what if that's just a complete misdiagnosis? What if that feeling of being stuck isn't some kind of character flaw, but actually a signal? A signal of something much, much deeper going on.
Okay, so get this. It turns out science actually splits procrastination into two totally different things. On one side, you've got passive procrastination. That's the classic one we all think of, where you're just paralyzed by indecision, you can't get started, you can't act. But then, on the other side, there's active procrastination. And this is a deliberate choice. It's a strategy some people actually use to harness the pressure of a deadline to get laser focused. So the big takeaway here is that not all delay is created equal. So to really understand why we get trapped in that passive, paralyzing state, we've got to look past the behavior itself and meet the part of our brain that's supposed to be running the show. Let's talk about your brain's CEO. And that CEO is what scientists call your executive function. You can just think of it as the management system for your entire brain. It's the whole suite of skills that lets you plan your day, focus your attention, remember instructions, and juggle all the different tasks on your plate. You know, when the CEO is having a good day, everything just flows. But when it gets overwhelmed, the whole company just grinds to a halt. And this right here just brilliantly captures the human cost when we misunderstand this whole struggle. This actually comes from a real testimony given to the Australian Parliament. I mean, can you imagine being a kid wrestling with this internal management system and the only feedback you ever get is that you're lazy or you're just a daydreamer? The emotional weight of that is just immense. This quote from that same report, man, this cuts right to the bone, doesn't it? Because a struggling executive function has absolutely nothing to do with a lack of intelligence. In fact, that's what makes it so maddening. You're smart enough to know exactly what to do, but your brain CEO just can't seem to execute the plan. And of course, this isn't something that just magically disappears when you leave school. It builds, it compounds into adult life. And that internal feeling of being scattered and overwhelmed starts to have real high-stakes consequences. It can put a massive strain on our careers, our relationships, all while that fear of not performing becomes this constant, draining pressure in the background. Okay, so if it's not a lack of intelligence, and it's not a lack of desire, what's causing the CEO to get so overwhelmed in the first place? Well, this brings us to the next critical piece of the puzzle, this idea of a mental energy crisis. For generations, the advice has always been the same, right? Just try harder, use more willpower. But what modern psychology is telling us is that that's a completely wrong-headed way to think about it. The issue isn't some infinite well of willpower that we're just failing to tap into. It's about managing a very finite, very real, and very depletable resource, your mental energy. The schema model of self-control explains this perfectly. Here's how it works. When you do something that requires self-control, anything really, it activates what's called a reduced vitality schema. That's just a fancy way of saying a message gets sent to your brain saying, hey, I'm getting tired. In response, your brain's prime directive switches to one thing: conserve energy. It's just like your phone automatically flipping into low power mode. Your brain deliberately reduces the effort you can put into the next thing to save its battery. So that feeling of being unable to start, that's not a bug. It's a feature. It's your brain's energy management system kicking in. All right, now let's do something a little different. Let's zoom way out. Because all of these internal battles, the procrastination, the overwhelmed CEO, this energy crisis, they're all playing out on a much, much bigger stage. A stage created by our very perception of time itself. Believe it or not, over 1,600 years ago, a philosopher named Augustine of Hippo was wrestling with this. He was trying to figure out what even is time.
And his conclusion was that it's this impossibly slippery thing. The past is gone, the future isn't here yet, and the present, well, the present is just this fleeting moment that vanishes as soon as it appears. Time, he argued, only seems to exist in the act of constantly slipping away from us. And he used this incredible metaphor, the dripping moments of time. He was probably thinking of a water clock, which measured the hours by the slow, steady drip of water from one bowl to another. Drip, drip, drip. That's our experience of life, isn't it? A constant, relentless forward motion that we can't stop, we can't slow down, creating this deep underlying pressure to do something with those moments before they're gone for good. Okay, let's pull all of these different threads together now. Because by looking at this very common, very human struggle through all these different lenses, psychology, neuroscience, even philosophy, we can start to build a more accurate and, frankly, a much more compassionate way of understanding ourselves. So here's the big takeaway. What we've all been taught to call laziness is actually a really complex signal. It could be the paralyzing indecision of passive procrastination. It's almost certainly not a lack of intelligence, but an overloaded executive function, an overwhelmed CEO. It's not a moral failure of willpower, but a deep biological instinct to conserve precious mental energy. And this entire internal drama is amplified by the constant pressure of living inside those dripping moments of time. And this brings us to a final thought. The next time you find yourself stuck, unable to act, instead of reaching for that old, tired, and frankly unhelpful judgment of laziness, try reaching for curiosity instead. Just ask yourself this one question. What is my mind, my CEO, really trying to tell me right now? Is it asking for more clarity? Is it signaling an energy crisis? Is it just completely and utterly overwhelmed? The answer might just change everything.